nervous now. Thanks for that talk, John. There's a few things I was just thinking about, and like there was frustration from people in the audience going, why don't people understand what it's like for developers? And I wonder if it's all a matter of like framing it correctly. Like there must be things that we do that other people would go like, my physio, like, Dave, if you just did 10 minutes of stretching every day, then you wouldn't have to see me every 6 months. Yeah. And that is exactly, it's the same kind of concept. Is we never do what we should do.
Yeah.
And it's not as though we as developers are perfect just because we write tests. So it's actually how do we have that conversation in a way that people will understand it who aren't. I don't know, have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I think that we have to understand our client's perspective. The onus is on us because we are the ones asking, can I have more time to do tests, essentially. And just to the point, your question a moment ago, just to reframe some of what I said in the talk there, I tend to work on day rates. And so you can't necessarily say, well, actually, I should just be pricing testing into the job and things like that. I end up in a team working on a day rate. The clients set the budget, the clients set the deadlines, and they sort of say, here you go, perform a miracle. And then we end up having to make the choice, how do we achieve the result in this time? And when you're making those choices, I think you need to understand why the client's putting those constraints on you. And that's kind of the idea in the point about it being about commercials. So really, I think we as the developers, or your physio as the service provider, as the expert, I suppose, in each given scenario, we need to understand why you're not doing your stretching, why the clients are saying, actually, you know what, skip the testing, just get features out. Because as soon as we understand that, then we have the tools we need to turn that around and say, well, actually, here, let me change your perspective on the fact that testing is costing you now. It's an investment for later. So maybe build more budget into your MVP and get testing started, at least, as I say, sorted from the beginning, testing started. Or accept that you're not going to get testing in there, but build a budget in for that later, and then let them make the decision on their terms and in their frame of mind, from the commercial perspective. So I think that's the thing. It's about trying to learn how to think like clients, I suppose.
And I suppose it doesn't necessarily have to be commercial. It could be if your client, I don't know, loves going to the gym, is in the weights room 3 times a week or whatever. You could say, well, look, do you really need these protein shakes or whatever it is that they do? Kind of understand something that they do, and then you could say, well, us not testing is like you not having enough sleep, or you not having your protein shakes, or you not going to the gym, or something like that. It could frame it completely in something that's personal to them. Or it's like you not spending time with your kids or something like that. Well, I'm saying something dodgy here.
Great point.
We've been having this conversation just now, but so how I've had success with this before is that I have made it very relevant to business. Sometimes you just got to wait till things fall over in production, and then say, and then hopefully there'll be push for some kind of process that analyzes why that happened, and when that does happen, calculate how much it costs the business and what the relative cost of putting tests into it would be, because then it becomes very concrete. So then it's in the language that the business understands. Then to think about the impact of the impact of having tests or not having tests. I guess that's like the nuclear option. You would hope to be able to convince them before that. Yes. But sometimes if you're not always you don't always hold all the cards. If you're joining a company that's been around for a long time, they haven't done many tests, whatever, they don't have those kind of processes in place. One of the reasons to help them with that, build up those processes and convince them of those processes is probably, when was your last outage and how painful was it? and
Absolutely.
And how would you prevent that?
Yeah, those. I guess those are kind of "I told you so" moments, aren't they? You say, "I've
Well,
been saying that you
very
need testing."
specifically don't say, "I told you."
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
you don't.
yeah.
You don't absolutely don't say that. But I kind of think that I certainly, and I suspect that it's true for everyone else in this room, we want to write tests so that we know that the bugs aren't going to happen next time we're changing something.
Yeah.
And when one of those "I told you so" moments comes up, and you say, "Well, it's because I wasn't writing tests," because you personally feel responsible, don't you? If you wrote a bit of code, you put it out, you released it, and it's failed, and it's cost your client money essentially. And again, we've got to frame everything in it's costing somebody money, because that's how your clients think about it. What you really wanted to be doing in the first place was knowing that the changes you were making were safe, because you had some tests that you were running, and you said, "Okay, cool, I'm happy with that. I push that forwards." When you have those moments where something does fail, and you're then sort of saying, "Well, look, here you go. This is what I've been telling you about." I'll yield. You wish that.
I tend to find sometimes, not just with testing, but with the whole approach to client buy-in, they always want to see something, and it's very hard to get them to delay the gratification. And testing, I feel, is something that's like exemplifies that. But it might be, it might be testing 3 libraries before you go ahead and write the feature, and then like all these things that you can do to build up. So I guess what I was wanting to ask was, how have you got much experience with how to get your clients to agree to these things, maybe the things that they want to do? Because building on what you're saying, they're often like, it's like when you go to the doctor, you often lie about how many cigarettes you smoke. I find clients are very similar. Like they don't always tell you their pain points. They don't always tell you their problems. They almost treat you like they're trying to pitch to you. So you're getting the pitch deck problem. You're not getting their pain points. And so that's where I struggle.
So as I've become more senior and more, I guess, I was going to say jaded, but that's not what I mean. As I've, I guess, more reached out, more aware of how the business works, I guess. You have to realise that you're not always in the driving seat. I think there's an uncomfortable thing here, because we all want our code to work. Like, we all want our code to work, and it feels horrible if you put code in production and it doesn't work. But at the same time, we're not putting up the money to make all that code work in a bulletproof way. So there are projects and there are projects, right? There's things in the business that absolutely need to work, and then there are things that may be projects that aren't as important. And I think we don't like that idea. I certainly don't like that idea. But there's it's on the company to work out which is which, and which we put where we focus our finite efforts, I think. That's an uncomfortable realization that I've had.
I'm just sort of thinking of the question. A lot of this is, to me, what is the actual value of tests? I think as developers, the value of tests to you is kind of clear in that, from my perspective, I really like writing tests, because I think it makes me write a lot better code. That since I've started testing, I've made a lot more progress in programming better, because
you find that you've become more productive.
Yeah,
you're constantly
because I'm
ticking boxes.
You go through the test and you think, I want this to do this, and I don't want it to do that, and then you sort of do the sort of red-green refactor kind of testing system. But that benefit is more for me a lot of the time than it is necessarily for the project. That sort of is the benefit of adding tests to a code base solely from you as a developer's perspective, or is it does it actually add value to the product? I don't know whether it's sort of one of these things of who is getting the value from it?
I would say it's the quality of the code base, and it's the kind of, if you want to be able to refactor something and you want this project to live for a long time, it needs tests. It's absolutely non-negotiable, because your code base will just decay and rot, and you won't know what's going on. I've worked in many different kind of code bases, ones that had very limited tests and ones that are very well tested, and the ability to actually maintain and refactor and work on this code base is so significantly improved by the test coverage. It wouldn't, nowadays it's not negotiable.
A lot of that is still, like the working with the code is still the developer. Like, you are benefiting from that. Okay, if you're a company and your product is the code, then you benefit from the developers working better. But if your product is the end result, arguably you get the benefit because the product presumably looks better if it's tested.
Yeah.
But
I guess it's the cost. How easy is it to add new features and make changes? If you don't have tests and you can still do that and it's delivering, then fine.
because then at that point you sell to the customer as a thing of, well, the benefit of us having tests is I will work faster and long-term development is better, which I agree with. But again, that still comes down to, from a developing side, to their perspective, they see the end result of the test, but I guess not the test itself.
I guess a lot of it is, are they seeing their features get delivered quick enough, and are they having problems with it coming to life? Because I think that's where I've seen the problems happen. We've got this code base, no one knows how to change it, we can't maintain it because there's no tests. So that's
I think the thing about the value to the client is, like, what you need to do is get the client to buy into the process of formulating acceptance criteria into a way that they understand. Because, I mean, if you're looking at, say, business-driven development, which is sort of end-to-end, but a little bit more abstract, it's like describing functionality, describing the change that you want to make, and then your test becomes evidence to the change that you're doing. It's the map. It's your North Star, ultimately. It's like where you are going. And so that allows you to engage with the client to ensure that your tests are in parity with what their business is trying to do. And then if there is change, then you can change and then change your code around the change. But it's I look at it a bit like if you're climbing, you need to have your hands on at least two things. I mean, depending on how good you are, right? You at least have to be on one, but you need to be able to change. You need to have a steady footing, and so that test path is that step, but making it real by showing it to the client. API, we've been using Spotlight for API specs. You actually define your specification, test your code against the spec, which means that writing APIs is really quick because you don't need to do all the assertions for everything. It speeds up the process. So it's a tool to basically, it's like sharper knife you've got, the easier it is to cut. And so once you've got that buy-in to go, this isn't a hindrance, we're talking the same, like that's part of the process. You are making this a better thing because this is the way.
I just wanted to make sure that I understood the format because I missed a bit. It's kind of like the chair's like a conch, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really have that. I just wanted to
No,
jump in at that point, but I
fine.
couldn't do it from over there. So
Yeah, so but it is that thing we're saying about delivering, like the client wants to see a thing. My background is graphic design, so it is clearly the client always had something to say about what it looked like. And you'll find where, particularly if the client is engaged in the process, it's like, what's it look like, how does it click, oh, that's not in the right place, or, the pixel perfect was such a thing in my early days, because they've lost sight of what the actual thing, the function is. And that's the real thing, and bringing it back to how the person is interacting, what you're trying to do. So when your client is saying, I want to deliver this quickly, what they really want to say is they want to get it in front of their clients and actually want to either start gathering data or start gathering money or service or selling a thing. And that's the objective there. That's the real bind. So it's like understanding what the problem is you're trying to solve. So, putting stuff into A/B testing, for example, is a good way, or just going, right, we'll feature flag something, your client can see it, you can talk about it, we can start You know, it's making it tangible to the client early enough so that they know, they trust that you're actually going to improve it. You know, you can feature flag your client in on their own, and they can see. I mean, we've got element.
I figured it would hop up because I've got a question specifically about that, about the A/B testing. That's not something I've done a huge amount of, I wonder if you've experienced a lot of scenarios where you're saying to your clients, look, we need to A/B test this. We need to actually get feedback from your users so that we know we're making the right decisions, which kind of has a parallel to your in-code testing in terms of saying, well, you know, I want my in-code test to pass so I know that the changes I'm making aren't breaking things. Did you find that you were getting pushback against, you know, were you getting clients who were saying, why bother testing it? Like, you're the expert, you should know that it works, right? Or
well, I mean, I guess the thing is, if you're doing UI stuff, it's kind of, it works, or whether, you know, something that can look great and function badly. People are learning that, you know, brands have made huge amounts of money releasing stuff which don't work very well but look amazing, you know, like that's the thing, you know, or fashion which is amazing, expensive, desirable, but trash, right, you know. And so, but is that, I guess the thing is, with the, I mean, not maybe less so A/B testing, but more, say, feature flagging, which is kind of ring fencing, is having confidence to release it. So obviously, if you are at a point when you've got a feature flag related stuff, it's probably because the client's lost confidence of something, so it's working out what it is, reinstating what it is, or going, well, we'll just incrementally improve that. So getting into the pattern of smaller incremental releases, small changes which are have metrics on them, and then that brings you into the, well, if we don't need the QA, we can use our test resource. Therefore, we are confident we're releasing, we're in control, and you can have this earlier and cheaper, which is ultimately what it boils back down to.
Yeah. I mean, those are the words that your clients, or, you know, your employers, if you're basically whoever's feeding the money into what you're doing, you know, those are the words they like. You can have it sooner, you can have it cheaper. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where, you know, I sort of think that we want to validate what we're doing, which is why we're doing tests, and whether that's in-code tests or you kind of your A/B tests or your feature flagging, you want to kind of know that you're doing the right thing. And I think that might be part of the problem, is that your clients, your employers, as soon as you say, actually, are we doing the right thing? Can we test this? You know, can we assume that we're not right first time? You know, they start asking the question, well, why aren't you right first time? What's going on there? Maybe, again, this comes back to what Dave was saying here about, like, how do we get the client to understand our perspective, which is that we're not always right. You know, we might be supposed to be experts, but as experts, I guess we need to recognise the limitations of our knowledge. It was the that knowledge gap. There's a name for it, the effect, where, you know, at the beginning you think you know loads, and then as you learn more, you Dunning-Kruger, thank you, that's what I was looking for. You know, yeah, it's that Dunning-Kruger effect, isn't it? Is that actually, as an expert, probably the value isn't what you understand that you don't know, and perhaps that's what we need to be selling the clients around testing.
Just a point to add on that. I found it's quite, so how often, I'll say this the other way around, I've often had clients where they'll give you a brief and, you know, tell you what they want for a particular feature. You build it, and then they're like, oh, but it needs to do this, it needs to do that. I found it's quite effective to just reference that to them when you're saying, this is why I don't think of everything when I'm writing code. You know, it's hard to think of every single eventuality. There's always edge cases and other things.
Yeah.
It's been effective at times as a way of helping make that point.
Yeah, well, actually, that's a really good point, is that when the goalposts are moving, like, so we work in agile environments almost all the time, right? You're dealing with putting something out there, and then, you know, your client or even your users, somebody says, well, actually, you know, are we happy with the way that works? Let's change it. And again, when your goalposts are being moved, whether that's before or after your release, when changes are being requested, you really want to know that the changes you then make to the work you've already done are not either breaking the work you've already done, or if they are, you actually need to go back and reassess the criteria that you were working on in the first place. And tests give you a good place to kind of document that criteria. And so that's again another kind of way to sell it to the client, is to say, well, let's use tests as documentation and to verify our assumptions.
I just came and sat here to make that point. Yeah, you're given a spec, and you write your tests to your understanding of what you've been asked to do. And then when the client says it doesn't do what I expected, you can then add his interpretation into your tests before you then go and change the code to make it do what he wanted in the first place. So it gives you the point in there. It's the stable point to start making a change.
I'd say another point on top of that is we've started doing a bit of TDD at our place, and I think the one thing that I never appreciated about it, but I do know, is that it helps you understand the problem. So you start with a very simple test, doing the most simple thing, and then you kind of understand the problem very little, what you're trying to solve, but then you can start adding a new edge case or a new case in, and then you change your code just to make those two work, and then you've understood the problem a little bit better, and then you keep doing this, you keep adding these little tests, and then you have a totally different understanding of the problem from what you originally may have thought. So, and what it ends up with is that you've got a super flexible kind of system, potentially, that you built up all the test cases, and you now understand the problem in such greater depth than if you kind of just went straight into the code and you're like, yeah, I'm going to do all this.
And if you're doing TDD, then it maybe gives you an idea of how you're going to approach it. If you've got a good set of cases laid out, then you think, oh, actually, well, I was thinking of, or it can go the other way. You can write the tests to what you think, how you're going to write the code, and then the test might change that idea. So,
And also, it should enable you to build something that's way more flexible, because rather than you make so many assumptions when you build things, you think, oh yeah, let's have one class here and another class there, but then the reality of it is that doesn't work, or it might not quite pan out as how you expected. So by having the tests in there first, it gives you the ability to actually change the implementation to something that actually fits the real kind of use case better.
So, I mean, I suppose this is, we've talked like a lot about persuading clients, or, the benefit of testing, but now it's kind of where we're trying to, I suppose the other side is what makes it easier for us to test. So I've been listening to Atomic Habits, which is a book about, how to change behaviour and things like that. And one of the things they say is make it easy to do the habits that you want to do, and make it difficult to do the habits, your bad habits, to stop them. So, for example, go shopping once a week and just buy loads of healthy food. So when you come home, there's some healthy food in the fridge. You're more likely to eat healthily than you get back late and go, I have no food in the house, so I'll just get a, Deliveroo or whatever. And I wonder, it seems like with the test-driven development, once that is in place, it's like the good habit. It's almost easier to write the tests. And I don't know, are there any other things that do you think might act as good habits to make it easy to write the tests, and are there also things you can do to make it harder to not write tests, and just set that framework up?
I think it depends on how your application's architected. So we started off not sure where to start our TDD, because do you start really deep in the application layer, or are you kind of at the UI level, you're looking at API controllers? Through time, we understood that actually it's best to write it kind of at the application layer, where it's kind of the entry point to our business logic, and we're not touching any kind of databases or anything like that, and it's so simple at this point to write the whole functionality at this level. So you can start writing your tests there, achieve all the different kind of sort of basic use cases, and then gradually build it up, and then eventually you've got a whole suite of tests that answer every question that you need of your application. You can change the internals and change them, set them up however you want, and it just makes things easier and better quality. Flexible.
So you have to get that initial framework set up, but presumably once it's there, other developers coming onto the project see it, and they go, this is the way that we do things. Have you got any ideas how you can make friction for it to not test? I suppose they hate it as a thing, like test coverage, could be one thing, you can't commit this until you've got some people gamify it. But I mean, it's trying to push you against the bad habit of not writing tests. I don't know if you've got any insights on how you can.
I guess with TDD, if you're following it properly, you should never write any code unless you've got a test case for it. So by default, you'll end up with 100%. I guess it's just about value as well for your tests. So you want to make sure that what you're testing is actually valuable, and this is the right thing that we need to be testing. There's so many different business logic rules that you must be aware of. So you'd write your tests for that. Yeah.
It's a tiny little point which we've not really covered is that we always talk about not having time to write documentation. But if you write your test cases with verbose enough titles and they are clear what your application is doing, then the test is the documentation for the code that you're writing. So that then leads to, obviously with TDD, you change the expectation to then write your test to match. But it's having something solid, because otherwise you're off to Confluence to find the bit of code that no one bothered writing, or it's got out of sync with the code that's been shipped. And it's often the way of, I turn annotations on in our code base and then I can see, well, this was written by the same person at the same time. So all this stuff, if it's got the same dev on it in the same month, then it's going to be related, or there is a voice which is common through there. So what you might find if you've been in code bases that have been around for a while, you'll see different voices, or you'll get to know the ghosts of the devs that died in the project before you. But it's helpful to know that, because then you can sort of go, well, there's that reason. Or, we see commits from 2020 in ours, which was when the application was originally outsourced, built by the Ukrainians. Devs may not even be about, but they're working to a need for a reason. There's commercial reasons why this may or may not have had test coverage in. The commercial reasons now ultimately, but it's having time to sort of use the references that we've got, like the Git blaming ultimately, but in a way of like, this is the voice, this is the reason why.
That's just a sort of an addendum to that, with especially with the commercial aspect. You've got the sprint review. If you can it's often difficult to explain to like a non-technical manager like why you spent so long implementing a button or whatever, and then if you can show that there's 26 tests to show that there's 26 different ways pressing this button you can hit the database depending on which user's logged in, or which plan they're on, or which version of the A/B test it's on, so all of that, and then that's just an extra thing that you can feed back at the sprint review, or after your.
I mean, with the sprint reviews particularly, it's key to have the stakeholders, or basically the people putting the money up, or the people using it in, because that's the thing. Like, business has a problem to solve. Someone's been nagging your boss or your manager to get you to do it. Like, there's a reason. We're in our business, we do quite a lot around Black Friday. It's a busy e-commerce, and so lots of stuff that were kind of nice to haves in the spring are becoming, we need this for this client. Clients expecting their orders to be 5 times more, like that kind of thing. So that's the reason. So that's kind of like the, almost like the reason why, why the client wants it quicker, why they want it cheaper, but actually they just want it better, right?
I'm just sort of thinking on that, of like the idea of a bit of what I think Chris was saying earlier, is the thing of different people almost wanting different levels of test for a project. That you're saying, if you're working on like Black Friday and things like this, where is there going to be things that you would almost test more thoroughly because of that, or would you say that you would want to test everything like at the same level almost?
We've got busier parts of our system, so some parts of our client-facing sites don't generally get as busy because we are ingesting orders from external e-commerce services, but our warehousing system will be really busy. So we're ensuring, so database writes are busy. I mean, this time last year, to anyone who saw my testing talk last year about our refactoring, which was around about this time due to, because your what's the word, slave queries when your site isn't busy, like you should when you've got a MVP, slave queries is not a thing, but the n+1 problem becomes a really big thing when you've got you double or quadruple, or you forgot about this busy part. So I think it is sort of key to the success of your app, kind of knowing what areas are busy or what areas need the red routes testing, or we're beginning to look at end-to-end, as I was saying earlier, about limited QA resource, going, well, bits that the client interacts with or bits where data is being written to the database or being changed. If a UI component, if a UI blows up, it's not going to screw the data. It will, we can roll something back, but if you're writing the wrong address in, or someone down the line is ingesting this information which isn't correct, and we get billed for it because it's wrong, then that's a big thing. So it's sort of, but for us, we've had 6 years of peak, so we've got some lessons that we can learn and some that we won't realise until we're doing live fixes on, beginning of November. I mean, that's just how it is. But again, that leads on to having your pipelines good, having your tests good, having confidence, but also knowing that when stuff does appear in production, reproduce it in your test, find it, make a breaking test. Because if you can't, someone reports something and you can't reproduce it, then you can't fix it.
Doesn't that though almost come back to what we've been saying about the idea of sort of setting people on tests? That if you're testing the sort of almost the most important stuff, is the stuff that's easiest, because I certainly can persuade my boss that I'm working on these tests because this is customer data. It's a web application, and I want to make sure that at no point can anybody access this stuff that is not the authorised person to do it.
Yeah, sure.
So sort of I have some fairly good robust tests on making sure people are logged in to access certain routes, and other pages sort of you almost have to add an exemption into a test to say this route should be public. So any public route that gets added in will automatically fail the test unless it's put into that thing, because GDPR and other sort of data protection rules mean.
I mean, once you've tested your login work, you don't need to check every logged in page. You've got to have, in particular if you're using a framework, if you're using Laravel Auth, then I don't need to test Laravel Auth because that's.
So this is actually where my test fell down, was that there was routes being added into a routes file that were not going through the sort of the authorization middleware. So suddenly there's public routes that were just sort of hanging around in the middle of sort of odd different routes files. So it became, okay, this is a modular app, everything gets tested.
Yeah, I mean, I will do an auth check on my on an endpoint, if it is, because I can't test it if I haven't got an authenticated user, I can't post to the API. So where I'm going with, but it's just what's the word? Determining your attack target, and some pages. So what? I mean, you probably everyone's had a contact page that's been spammed for, but all that does is make it noisy. It doesn't, whereas if someone's able to hijack your checkout page and steal credit card information, slightly more important, even though intrinsically it's pretty much the same page. It's a contact form with it. So.
I find it interesting that we started talking about knowing what bits of functionality a page is are most important to test. It almost ties in with something that I was thinking earlier. We were talking about the issues of persuading clients to do testing. And I wonder if there is a difference between employers with full-time devs, whether they have more persuasion, more knowledge of where to target things, and potentially contractors, particularly maybe short-term ones working with clients, who will then either say, no, I won't do testing and give in because they know that client will just go elsewhere for the cheaper job, get it done quicker, or sort of bully that way. And it sort of almost goes with the tooling and ease. If you're just cycling through short-term contractors, no one's going to build up that nice tool set that you can easily drop in and out of. You're waiting for someone to do that, whereas maybe full-time employees may do a bit more persuasion or slot it in and start building it up.
I think the progress of having the sort of the smooth framework, the easy path to actually make a test is kind of essential for any project. The actual need for tests, I think, varies a bit on almost the importance of, like, if you're just making a simple web page that mentions, PHP talks for the local people, does it matter massively how sort of well it's tested? From a data protection maybe, but it's not like sort of, if you're working on a Boeing aircraft, you should probably be writing more tests than I think they are. There's a thing, Capital Group, I think, was an investment company that did some code they had not tested, pushed it out to I think about 8 servers, forgot the 9th server, and they ended up going bankrupt in about 15 minutes. It was like $40 billion because they had not tested their code and it was doing some form of very fast money trading. And you kind of think, that's the type of story I have a small little notepad of files to persuade people, no, okay, look, this is what happens when things go wrong.
Is that the same as being a long-term contractor or full-time employee, to feel the pain of things that you might have thought were testing, where maybe, I don't know, not saying short-term contractors are like this, but you know, I push the code this out of the way, it's not my problem if it breaks now because I'm free of that contract. I wonder if there is that maybe tighter link, because you know that it's going to come back and haunt you 3 months later if you haven't quite caught it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a sort of internal sort of house dev, and I guess I'm working on projects that I started 5-6 years ago, so where I've made bad decisions, I'm the one who cleans them up. I guess, yeah, you do sort of almost look at things a bit differently, I guess, if you're coming in short term versus long term. And I think maybe right in terms of persuading people, you can find the areas that you can sort of say, look, this is sort of business critical. But I think it almost does come down to that thing of trying to almost push the value of what we're doing to how other people almost view that I often feel that a lot of the technical job seems to be trying to explain technical things to people who do not understand technical things, and in some cases point blank refuse to understand technical things, which can often be a little bit sort of analogies on top of analogies in a uncoordinated stack.
I think earlier someone mentioned having a limited QA department, and I think that might be fairly common, that a separate QA team comes through later. I wonder how different that is compared to testing. Does that show a similar level of investment of, you know what, we'll rely on the devs to maybe write some tests or something like that, but we won't have a QA yet, we'll let them mark their own homework, or until something goes wrong where it's like, we'll bring one QA in and we'll do a little bit and go from.
Sorry, I'm not supposed to talk about that bit, but sorry, can you clarify this scenario where there was a limited QA team?
So, for example, I've worked in places before where there's been a full team of devs, no separate QA resource on there, or one against 20 developers or something like that, so they are just testing a good path or something like that, all reliant on the developers and the testing that we're talking about now to have it in place. And I wonder if that helps show maybe where companies might be invested or more in sort of in favour of testing, or where, what they weight their favourability in.
I don't know, it just brought to mind like an interesting experience I had with QA, where I often found that, you know, my manager would be telling me to ship, and I know, you know the thing's wrong, you know, like code doesn't ship without bugs, and you just like, you push it, and I often found QA would always find loads of bugs that I didn't know about, and they'd never find any of the bugs that I knew about, and ever. Yeah, that was my sort of, but yeah, they often found that I'd uncommitted a class for like to make things work, and half the page wasn't there or something, but you know, they never actually find the bugs in the feature, but we were quite small, you know, quite like a small shop, I guess, so I guess the experience in a big organisation would be different.
I have heard of a way of trying to assess how many bugs there are in a system by having your known bugs, and then you hand it over to someone and they go and find a set of bugs. So if you say you knew there were 5 bugs, or you knew there were 10 bugs, and this other team find 20 bugs, which are only 5 of yours,
And then they have
you
to
can
find
kind of
their
approximate
bugs.
up that there'll probably be even more, because, you know, ratio of the ones that, yeah. Yeah, so that is, there is value in leaving bugs in your code, if you want to do that kind of analysis. Yeah.